In a quiet town nestled along the Appalachian Hills, there lived a man named William. He wasn't a philosopher. He didn't quote Marcus Aurelius or read Epictetus by candlelight. He simply lived a simple life, a good life. He worked with his hands, came home before sunset, and for nearly 20 years shared every evening with the woman he loved. But one autumn, something changed. There was no noise, no drama, no slammed doors, no shouting matches, no midnight ultimatums. It was quieter than that, more subtle, like the warmth of summer slowly fading, not vanishing in a moment, but slipping away, degree by degree. She still made dinner, still said, "Good night." But the conversations felt thinner. Her smile no longer reached her eyes. And William, though he wanted to ignore it, knew something was different. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever stood next to the person you love and felt more alone than if you were by yourself? This video is about that moment, that space between presence and absence, the moment when love hasn't left yet, but it's no longer whole. We're not here to dramatize heartbreak. We're here to look at it clearly. Because love, as the Stoics have taught us, is never something we truly own. It's something we experience, something we are invited into. But when that invitation is quietly withdrawn, when someone begins to fall out of love with you, they don't always say it. Instead, they show it, softly, subtly, and always in two ways. Today, through the story of William and his quiet heartbreak, we'll explore what those two signs are. Not to make you paranoid, but to make you wise. You'll learn why silence often reveals more than words, how emotional withdrawal comes before physical distance, what comparison looks like when it's never spoken, but deeply felt, and how Stoic philosophy offers you the clarity and courage to let go of what no longer nourishes your soul. Because this is not just a story about loss, it's a story about strength. The strength to stop grasping, the wisdom to stop pleading, the courage to stop waiting for someone to love you the way they used to. Stay with us until the end, because once you see these signs, you won't be surprised again. And you'll discover what the Stoics knew all along, that letting go when done with grace is not defeat. It is a victory of the soul. Let's begin. William once believed that heartbreak would arrive like an explosion, like the shattering of glass or a scream in the middle of the night. But he soon realized that with long, quiet love, endings don't come like accidents. They come more like a drought, not loud, not sudden, just a slow drying out, bit by bit. Dinner still happened with both of them at the table, but there was no wine anymore, no little stories about the day. She'd nod while he talked about the woodshop, but she didn't ask questions, didn't laugh like before. William used to think that if he just tried a little harder, brought flowers, cooked breakfast, fixed the fence she once complained about, things might return to how they used to be. But this is the first lesson Stoicism teaches us. Not everything is within our control. You can place your entire heart on the table, but if the other person has already turned away, they won't see it anymore. One Saturday afternoon, William came home earlier than usual. He walked in, holding 2 apple pies from the little bakery she used to love, and called her name through the living room. No answer. Not because she wasn't there, but because she had quietly stopped responding like she used to. He glanced through the kitchen window and saw her standing there, back turned, slicing apples into thin, precise strips. No greeting, no, "You're home early," like in the old days. Just silence, but not the kind that soothes, the kind that separates. He stood there for a few seconds, waiting for a glance, a smile, something to tether him to her again. But nothing came. Only the steady sound of a knife moving through apple skin, like a clock cutting time. William didn't get angry. He didn't ask, "Why are you being distant?" He didn't try to explain. He simply placed the bag of pies on the table and stepped out onto the porch. In that moment, he realized something profound, that love doesn't vanish like a storm. It dissolves like the last snow of the season, And you can't hold on to something melting in your bare hands. The only thing you can do is recognize it. That evening, William didn't try to spark a conversation. He sat in his familiar woven chair, staring at the kitchen light reflected in his tea. Old memories came back, an evening in June, when she hummed softly while cooking. A winter morning when they held each other beneath the blankets, hiding from the cold sunlight. But then he understood. Those were memories, not the present. And Stoicism doesn't teach us to live in the past. It tells us to face the truth, without fantasy, without resistance. Accept everything that happens as if you had chosen it, William recalled reading somewhere. He hadn't chosen this, but he could choose how to meet it. The next day, William didn't fix the door hinge like he'd promised. Not because he didn't care, but because he understood. No hinge could hold up a door already closing from the inside. He sat quietly on the porch, watching the autumn garden where leaves were falling one by one. Unmistakable signs that a season had passed. And he knew, if you learn to read those leaves, you'll stop being surprised. That's when the truth began to emerge, not through what she said, but through everything she no longer said. William used to think heartbreak would come with a crash, like the shatter of glass or a shout in the night. But he soon realized that with long-standing love, endings don't often come like accidents. They come like droughts, quiet, gradual. A slow drying out, moment by moment. Dinner still happened. So did polite good nights. But the wine was gone. So were the stories. She'd nod when he spoke of his workshop, but wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't laugh the way she used to. William thought, maybe if he just tried harder, flowers, breakfast in bed, fixing that gate she once complained about, maybe things would go back to how they were. But that's the first thing Stoicism teaches us. Not everything is within your control. You can place your heart gently on the table, but if the other has already turned away, they won't see it. One Saturday evening, William came home earlier than usual. He carried 2 apple pies from her favorite bakery and called her name through the living room. No answer. Not because she wasn't home, but because she had learned not to respond the way she once did. Through the kitchen doorway, he saw her, standing with her back to him, slicing apples with quiet focus. No, hey, you're home. No glance. Just silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that signals distance. He stood there for a moment, waiting for eye contact, a smile, some thread to hold on to. But there was nothing, only the steady slice of a knife through skin, like time cutting away what used to be. And in that moment, he understood. Love doesn't leave like a storm. It melts like the last snow of winter. You can't grasp it with bare hands. All you can do is notice. They stop sharing. Their inner world love, true love, doesn't begin with a kiss or a first date. It begins when someone invites you inside their private world. When you become the first person they want to tell everything to, their fears, their hopes, their thoughts before they're fully formed. But when love begins to fade, this is the first thing that disappears. For William, it started subtly. She stopped sharing the little things. No more stories about dreams she had. No more talk about the neighbor's dog or the funny thing she saw in town. The words were still there, but the soul behind them had retreated. And that, more than silence, was the sign. The conversations became functional. She asked if he wanted coffee. She told him dinner was ready. But gone were the deeper exchanges, the aimless late-night talks, the laughter sparked by nothing in particular. She spoke like someone checking a box, not hiding something, but simply withholding. And William realized he wasn't the first person she thought of when something happened anymore. Stoicism teaches us that we don't own people. We're simply invited into their inner gardens. And when that invitation is quietly withdrawn, you don't break in. You bow and step back. When someone stops sharing their inner world with you, it's not always an act of betrayal. It's an act of retreat, not loud, not cruel, just gone. They may still say good morning, still laugh at your jokes. But their inner life, the part that used to open to you like sunlight through curtains, is now somewhere else. And the most painful thing, they may not even know they've closed the door. To them, things feel normal. To you, it feels like being offered a chair at the table, but not a seat in their heart. The Stoics would not tell you to rage against that change. They would tell you, observe, accept. Let go of what is not yours to hold. William didn't argue. He didn't accuse her of being distant. He simply saw the change and honored it. Because pain doesn't come from the silence itself. It comes from expecting the silence to speak. And when the voice that once welcomed you now speaks only in practicalities, you are not being cruel by stepping back. You are being wise. That night, William didn't try to spark a conversation. He sat on his porch, watching the light from the kitchen reflect through his glass of tea. He thought of a June evening when she hummed softly while cooking, a winter morning when they stayed in bed to avoid the cold. But those were memories, not the present. And Stoicism doesn't tell us to cling to memories. It tells us to see what is, without illusion. He remembered something once said by a teacher: accept everything that happens as if you had chosen it. He didn't choose this distance, but he could choose how to meet it. The next day, William didn't fix the door she'd asked about, not out of bitterness, but because no hinge could fix a door closing from within. Instead, he sat on the porch and watched the trees shedding their leaves, quiet, steady, without resistance. Because once you learn how to read the leaves, you stop being surprised when the season changes. And that's when the truth reveals itself, not through what they say, but through what they no longer say. The days that followed were quiet, not in the comforting way that William once knew, but in that hollow, echoing quiet that follows when something vital has slipped through the cracks, the kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it stings. He still came home at the same hour, still washed his hands at the same sink, still sat down to the same meals at the same table. But something invisible had shifted in the space between them. It wasn't just that she no longer spoke about her day or asked about his. It was the way she looked at the world, at others. One Thursday afternoon, they walked together through the local market. It had been their ritual for years, browsing the vegetables, sampling apples, choosing jams. But today, her steps felt 2 beats ahead, or behind, out of sync. They stopped near the bakery where a young couple stood, laughing over something small and silly. William glanced at her, and though she said nothing, her gaze lingered. Not with jealousy, not even with longing, but with comparison. That was the moment he felt it. Not in what she said, but in how her silence stretched toward someone else. In how her eyes, once reserved for him, were now quietly measuring the world around them. And that's the second sign, when someone starts comparing you. Not with harsh words, not with confrontation, but with glances, with pauses, with the absence of the warmth that once made you feel like the only person in the room. At dinner, she complimented the way someone else arranged their front garden. Later, the way a neighbor had painted his porch. Then casually, how so-and-so's husband had just started hiking again. None of it was cruel, none of it accusatory, but William felt it like a splinter under the skin. He wasn't being seen anymore, not as a partner, but as a reference point for comparison. She didn't ask him to change. She didn't ask for more. She simply began admiring things he was not, quietly, consistently. And he realized something. You don't need to be criticized to feel replaced. You just need to watch someone's admiration drift to something, to someone, to somewhere else. It was like watching her repaint the image of him in her mind, but not with his colors, with borrowed ones, brighter ones that didn't belong to him and never had. The Stoics teach us that we cannot control the opinions of others. We cannot control where their eyes wander, where their hearts roam, but we can observe without illusion. We can stand still in the face of change without pleading for the past to return. Comparison is the slow poison of love. It whispers that who you are is not quite enough. And even when it's unspoken, even when it's denied, it leaves a mark. Because love, when true, is not a contest. It's not a silent ranking of traits. William didn't confront her. He didn't accuse. He didn't cry out, "Why do you look at them like that?" Instead, he began to see with new eyes. He noticed how she smiled more openly at others, how she laughed more easily in other rooms, how her gaze softened, not for him, but for moments he wasn't part of. And that's when he stopped trying to be what he wasn't. He stopped fixing the porch, stopped buying new shirts, stopped comparing himself to the comparisons she never voiced but always implied. Because he understood, when someone silently begins to compare you, they are already looking elsewhere for something they once found in you. It doesn't make them cruel. It doesn't make you unworthy. It simply means the season has shifted. And the greatest gift Stoicism offers in that moment is not the strength to win someone back, but the wisdom to stop measuring your worth by someone else's wandering attention. William sat on the porch that night, as the last light folded into the hills. He didn't ache for what he couldn't be. He honored what he was. And in that stillness, he found peace, not in being chosen, but in no longer needing to be. As the autumn days grew shorter and the light slanted differently across William's porch, he returned once more to the quiet path in the woods. The trees, now bare and honest, no longer pretended it was summer, and neither did he. There, beneath the watchful sky and the soft hush of fallen leaves, he found the watcher, still seated in silence, as though time itself had little sway over him. William sat beside him, not with desperation, not with questions, but with a stillness he had not known before. "I've seen it now," William said softly. "Not just the silence, but the comparisons. Her heart is no longer here. And for the first time, I didn't try to bring it back." The watcher nodded, not with sadness, but with a quiet kind of approval. He reached into his coat and handed William a small stone, simple, smooth, nothing special to the eye. "When the river no longer runs through the land," the watcher said, "the wise man does not cry to the sky for rain. He walks. He finds a new source. He builds where the water flows." And with that, they said nothing more, because nothing else needed to be said. Here is what William understood, and what you too must understand. You do not need to beg someone to love you again. You do not need to twist yourself into something smaller to fit into their fading affection. Letting go isn't weakness. It isn't giving up. It's the highest form of self-respect. Love, the Stoics remind us, is never something we possess. We are not its owners. We are its guests. And when the door closes, the dignified thing to do is not to knock harder, but to bow and walk away. There is strength in choosing peace over pride. There is power in knowing when something is no longer yours to hold. Letting go is not an act of apathy. It's an act of clarity. You let go not because you didn't care, but because you cared enough not to keep what had already left. You don't need closure in the form of an apology. You don't need permission to heal. What you need is to choose yourself, to rise the next day, to tend to your own garden, to greet the sun without waiting for anyone else to do it beside you, and to walk forward, not with bitterness, but with quiet courage. Because at the end of all things, love that must be begged for is not love that can nourish your soul. So if you are standing where William once stood, in the still, sharp silence of someone growing distant, hear this now. You are allowed to stop chasing. You are allowed to stop explaining. You are allowed to stop waiting. The leaf has fallen. The gate has closed. The season has changed. And your job now is not to bring it back. Your job is to keep walking, with your head high and your spirit whole. Because the one thing you must never lose in trying to keep someone else's love is your own soul. In today's world, where texting back too slowly can spark anxiety and social media creates illusions of constant, unwavering love, we often forget the quiet truth that love, like nature, has seasons. It doesn't always end in thunder. Sometimes it slips away silently, like the cooling of summer air. And the lesson we must carry with us, the one etched into William's story, is this: we cannot control the feelings of another. We can only control how we respond when those feelings begin to fade. This is the core of Stoic wisdom. Epictetus said it centuries ago, and it still rings true today. Some things are up to us and some things are not. A partner's heart, not up to us. Their choices, their silence, their distance, also not ours to command. But our reaction, how we hold ourselves through the unraveling of something we cherished, that is fully ours. And in that lies great power. Too often, when we feel love slipping away, we grasp harder. We explain, we plead, we perform. We try to fix what cannot be fixed, not because we're foolish, but because we're human. We believe that if we just say the right thing or do the right act, we can bring someone back to the place where they once stood beside us. But love is not a machine. It's a garden. And once the gate is closed, no amount of knocking will make it bloom again. William didn't yell. He didn't chase. He didn't script a speech hoping to pull Leanna's heart back into his hands. Instead, he did the hardest thing. He stayed still. He observed. And when he saw the signs, not in cruelty but in quiet absence, he let go. Not from apathy, not from bitterness, but from clarity, from wisdom. In the modern age, letting go is often mistaken for defeat. We're told to fight for what we love, to never give up, to fix it no matter what. But the Stoics offer a different kind of strength. The strength to know when a door is closing, and the courage to walk away without slamming it. The real tragedy is not that someone stops loving you. The real tragedy is if you forget to love yourself in the process. When love fades, it is not your job to prove your worth. It is not your job to hold up both ends of a bond that requires two hands. Your only responsibility is to meet the moment with grace, to acknowledge the falling leaf and not try to tape it back onto the branch. Because love, like the seasons, follows a rhythm. When it's time for it to fall, it will. Not because you failed, not because they are cruel, but because that is what nature does. So what do? We choose stillness. We choose dignity. We stop bargaining with reality and begin tending to the only garden that is always ours, our own soul. We rise early. We water what still grows. We give thanks for what was, and we make peace with what is. Letting go, when done with awareness and strength, is not the end. It is the beginning of something far deeper, the return to self. And that, above all, is a love you must never abandon. Now take a moment, breathe, and ask yourself, have I ever held on to someone? Not because they were still there, but because I was afraid of what it meant to let go. If this story stirred something in you, you're not alone. These are the questions Stoicism was born to help us face, with clarity, with courage, and with peace. If you found value in today's video, leave a comment below and share your reflections. Your voice might be the very thing someone else needs to hear. And if you believe in building inner strength, grace, and self-mastery through ancient wisdom, like this video, share it with someone who may need it, and subscribe to Stoic Wisdom Daily so you never miss a chance to grow a little stronger. Let's walk this path calmly together.